What if the thing that's been quietly destroying your peace isn't what happened to you, but how much you care about what happened to you? What if the version of you that finally wins doesn't care less about life, but cares less about what people think of it? Stay with me, because what I'm about to say is going to sound wrong before it sounds right. There is a version of you that nobody has met yet. Not your mother. Not your closest friend. Not the person who knows your deepest secrets and has seen you at your lowest. Nobody has met this version of you, because this version doesn't exist yet. But it's close. This version wakes up in the morning without that heavy, invisible weight sitting on their chest. That weight you've gotten so used to carrying that you've stopped noticing it's there, but it's there. Every morning. The weight of what she thinks. What he said. Whether they approve. Whether it landed right. Whether you came across well. Whether they like you. Whether they respect you. Whether the image you've been carefully, exhaustingly constructing in the minds of other people is still intact. That weight. This version of you doesn't carry it. Not because they stopped feeling. Not because they became cold, or indifferent, or hollow. But because somewhere along the way, they learned something so fundamental, so quietly revolutionary, that it changed the entire operating system of how they move through the world. They learned how to stop caring. Not about everything. About the right things. And today, on the Stoic path, that is exactly what we are going to talk about. This is not a motivational speech. This is not a pep talk dressed up in philosophy. This is a genuine, honest, direct conversation about one of the most liberating shifts a human being can make, and why most people never make it. Listen carefully. The thing nobody tells you about caring too much. Here is something that sounds almost too simple to be profound. Caring too much about the wrong things is the source of most human suffering. Not loss. Not failure. Not hardship. The caring about them. I want you to think about the last time you felt genuinely anxious. Genuinely stressed. Genuinely unable to sleep, or eat properly, or be present in a conversation because your mind was somewhere else entirely, running the same loop, rehearsing the same argument, replaying the same moment over and over. Now I want you to ask yourself honestly. Was the situation itself the problem? Or was it the amount of mental and emotional energy you were pouring into it? Because here is what I have observed, in studying Stoic philosophy, in paying attention to how human beings actually operate under pressure, the situation is almost never as destructive as the relationship we form with it. Let me tell you about a man named Thomas. Thomas had two colleagues at work. Both received the same critical feedback from their manager on the same day about the same project. Word for word, the same feedback. The first colleague, let's call him David, went home that evening and dismantled himself. He replayed the conversation 40 times. He questioned his competence. He drafted 3 different defensive emails, deleted them all, and spent the rest of the week performing a kind of internal trial in which he was simultaneously the prosecutor, the defendant, and the jury. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. He was, for all practical purposes, incapacitated, not by the feedback, but by his relationship with the feedback. The second colleague, let's call her Grace, heard the same words, nodded, asked 2 clarifying questions, wrote down 3 action points, and went home and made dinner. Same feedback. Same words. Same situation. 2 completely different inner experiences. David cared too much, about the wrong thing. He cared about what the feedback meant about his worth, his image, his standing. Grace cared about the right thing, what the feedback could teach her, and what she was going to do with it. This is the distinction that changes everything. Caring is not the enemy. Misdirected caring is the enemy. And the moment you begin to redirect what you care about, everything changes. Quietly. Powerfully. Permanently. The Stoic foundation, why the wisest people in history chose this. The Stoics did not stumble onto this idea accidentally. They built an entire philosophy around it, one of the most rigorously tested, practically applied, and enduringly relevant philosophical traditions in human history. And at the center of that philosophy was a distinction so clean and so clarifying that once you truly understand it, you cannot unsee it. Epictetus, a man who began his life as a slave and ended it as one of the most respected philosophers of the ancient world, called it the dichotomy of control. Some things are in your control. Some things are not. What is in your control? Your thoughts, your responses, your values, your effort, your character, your choices. What is not in your control? Other people's opinions, other people's behavior, outcomes you cannot determine, the past, the future, what they say about you when you leave the room. Simple. Clean. Devastating in its implications. Because here is what Epictetus said next, and I want you to really hear this. If you try to avoid only those things contrary to nature that are within your control, you will not be disturbed by anything that happens. Not anything. Not the criticism. Not the rejection. Not the disappointment. Not the failure. Not the person who walked away. Not the opportunity that didn't come. Not the reputation that took a hit. Not the opinion that landed wrong. Not anything. Because when you stop anchoring your peace to things outside your control, when you genuinely, fundamentally, stop caring what you cannot govern, you become, in the most literal sense, undisturbable. And an undisturbable person is a dangerous person. Not dangerous in aggression. Dangerous in effectiveness. Because while everyone around them is being tossed by the waves of other people's opinions and unpredictable outcomes, they are standing on the ocean floor. Unmoved. Clear. Operating from a place of such settled internal authority that the chaos above them becomes almost irrelevant. That is what stopping caring, the right way, actually produces. Not emptiness. Power. What you're actually losing when you care too much. I want to get specific. Because I think the cost of overcaring is something most people feel but have never actually named out loud. When you care too much about what people think of you, you lose your voice. You edit yourself before you speak. You shape your opinions around the room. You become, over time, a carefully curated performance of a person rather than an actual one. And performances are exhausting. They require constant maintenance. They collapse under pressure. And they produce a particular kind of loneliness that is almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it, the loneliness of being surrounded by people and yet completely unknown. When you care too much about outcomes you cannot control, you lose your present. You spend today and tomorrow's anxiety or yesterday's regret. The meal in front of you goes untasted. The conversation happening right now goes unheard. The actual texture of your actual life, the only life you have, passes by while your mind is somewhere else entirely, managing a future that hasn't happened yet or a past that cannot be changed. When you care too much about being liked, you lose your standards. You tolerate what you shouldn't tolerate. You accept what you know isn't right. You keep people in your life past their expiration date because the discomfort of their disappointment feels more unbearable than the slow drain of remaining in the wrong situation. And when you care too much about being right, you lose your growth. Because being open to being wrong requires a kind of ego flexibility that overcaring makes impossible. The person who needs to be right cannot learn. They can only defend. These are not small losses. These are the losses that, compounded over years, produce a life that looks fine from the outside and feels hollow from the inside. A life lived for the comfort of other people's perceptions. And the antidote, the real, honest, stoically grounded antidote, is learning to stop. Short story, the man who stopped apologizing for his existence. There was a man named Leonard. Leonard was the kind of person who apologized for everything. Not just mistakes, everything. He apologized for taking up space in a conversation. He apologized for having a different opinion. He apologized for his success when people around him were struggling. He apologized for his needs as if having them was an imposition on the world. He was, by every external measure, a generous and considerate man. But inside Leonard was a war. A constant, exhausting, low-grade war between who he actually was and who he thought he needed to be in order to remain acceptable to the people around him. One evening, Leonard was sitting across from his father, a quiet, observant man who didn't say much but saw everything. And his father looked at him across the dinner table and said something Leonard had never heard before. "Leonard. You keep apologizing for things that don't require apology. Do you know what that teaches people? It teaches them that you believe you are a burden. And people treat you the way you teach them to." Leonard didn't sleep that night. Not because the words hurt, though they did. But because they were true in a way that landed somewhere so deep and so central that he couldn't unfeel them. He had been caring, desperately, compulsively, exhaustingly, about being palatable. About being easy. About never being too much. And in doing so, he had made himself, gradually and completely, into less. Less than his actual opinions. Less than his actual needs. Less than his actual size. The shift didn't happen overnight. Genuine shifts never do. But it began that evening with one decision: to stop apologizing for things that didn't require an apology. To stop editing himself for rooms that hadn't asked to be protected from the full version of him. And what happened next surprised him. The people worth keeping, stayed. And found him more interesting than they ever had before. The people who left, revealed, in their leaving, that what they had valued was not Leonard at all. But the performance of Leonard. The convenient, apologetic, self-minimizing version that had never cost them anything. When Leonard stopped caring about keeping those people comfortable, he finally had enough room to become himself. And himself turned out to be extraordinary. The morning practice: why you need to hear this every day. The title of this episode says something specific: listen to this every morning. And I want to explain why that's not just a phrase. It's an instruction. Because here is the honest truth about the shift we are describing today. It is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. Every morning, before the world gets its hands on you, before the phone fills your mind with other people's urgency, before the day makes its demands, before the noise begins, you need to return to this truth. I am not responsible for managing other people's perceptions of me. I am not available to be disturbed by things outside my control. My peace is not a reward I earn by performing well enough for the people around me. It is a foundation I build by returning to my own values every single morning. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, a man with every reason to care enormously about what people thought of him, began every single morning with a practice of mental preparation. He would remind himself, before the day began, of who he intended to be. Not who others expected him to be. Not who would be most applauded or most approved of. But who he, in his deepest and most honest self, knew he was called to be. He did this every day. Not because he had figured it out and was simply maintaining the result. But because he knew that the pull toward over-caring, toward people-pleasing, toward managing perceptions, toward anchoring his peace to things outside himself, was a daily gravitational force. And resisting it required a daily counterforce. This is the morning practice. Return to your center. Every morning. Before the world arrives. Remind yourself what you care about. And what you don't. And then go live accordingly. We have done serious work in this first part. We've looked honestly at what overcaring actually costs: your voice, your presence, your standards, your growth. We've grounded this in one of the most powerful philosophical traditions ever developed. We've sat with Leonard's story and seen what becomes available when you stop apologizing for your own existence. And we've established why this is not a one-time insight but a daily practice. What actually happens when you stop caring about the wrong things? Something happens when you stop caring about the wrong things. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment of transformation that you can point to and say, that was the day everything changed. It happens quietly. Like a room that has been slowly filling with smoke, and someone finally opens a window. You don't notice the smoke clearing all at once. You just notice, gradually, that you can breathe again. That the air is different. That something that was making everything harder has been removed, and the absence of it feels so natural, so right, so fundamentally correct, that you find yourself wondering how you lived inside it for so long. That is what this part is about. The window opening. What actually changes, and why it surprises people. Most people who begin this work expect the change to feel like subtraction. Like losing something. They expect to feel colder. More detached. Less connected to the people and experiences around them. They expect that caring less will mean feeling less, and the prospect of that frightens them. Because feeling, even when it hurts, is at least proof of being alive. And the idea of going numb in the name of peace doesn't sound like freedom. It sounds like a different kind of prison. But here is what actually happens, and this is the part that surprises almost everyone who does this work genuinely. When you stop caring about the wrong things, you start feeling the right things more deeply. Not less. More. Because here is the truth about emotional bandwidth. It is finite. Every human being has a daily reserve of emotional energy, and most of us are spending the vast majority of it on things that do not deserve it. On managing perceptions. On processing other people's moods. On the low-grade anxiety of wondering whether we are enough, whether we are liked, whether the image we are projecting is landing the way we need it to land. That is where the energy goes. Day after day. Year after year. And what gets starved? What gets the leftover scraps of a bandwidth that has already been depleted by performance and people-pleasing, is the actual experience of your actual life. The joy that could be felt fully, felt at a fraction. The love that could be received completely, received with one eye still on whether you are being perceived correctly. The peace that could be inhabited deeply, inhabited only in the brief gaps between worrying about things you cannot control. When you stop caring about the wrong things, you get that bandwidth back. And what you do with it, what becomes available to you when your emotional energy is no longer hemorrhaging into 100 insignificant drains, is nothing short of extraordinary. Short story, the woman who disappeared and came back different. There was a woman named Celeste who everyone described the same way. She's so warm. She's so accommodating. She's always there for everyone. And it was true. Celeste was all of those things. She was the person you called at midnight. The person who remembered your birthday, your anniversary, your mother's surgery date, the name of your difficult colleague. She was present, attentive, endlessly available. But Celeste had a secret that she barely admitted to herself. She was disappearing. Not physically. But the person she had been before the years of accommodation, the woman with strong opinions, with creative ambitions, with a particular and vivid way of seeing the world, that woman was getting quieter. More faded. More distant. Because Celeste had made an unconscious trade. She had traded her own inner life for the approval of the people in her outer one. Every time she swallowed an opinion to keep the peace, a piece of her voice went with it. Every time she cancelled her own plans to be available for someone else, a piece of her time went with it. Every time she shaped her personality to fit the room she was in, a piece of her identity went with it. And nobody noticed. Because from the outside, Celeste looked like she was thriving. Then one morning Celeste woke up, and she couldn't remember the last time she had done something purely because she wanted to. Not because it was needed. Not because someone had asked. Not because it would make her more likable or more useful or more secure in someone else's affections. Just because she wanted to. She sat with that realization for a long time. And then, quietly, without announcement, without drama, Celeste began to stop. She stopped editing her opinions before she spoke them. She stopped rearranging her schedule every time someone else's urgency appeared. She stopped measuring her worth by the temperature of other people's approval. The first few weeks were uncomfortable. Some people in her life pushed back. Some were confused. A few were openly displeased. And Celeste felt the familiar pull, the old gravitational force of overcaring, trying to draw her back into performance. She didn't go back. And 6 months later, the people who genuinely loved her told her the same thing, independently, in different words, with the same astonished warmth. You seem more like yourself than I've ever seen you. She hadn't become less warm. She hadn't become selfish or cold or unavailable. She had simply stopped disappearing. And the woman who came back, the real one, the unedited one, the one who had been quietly buried under years of caring too much about the wrong things, turned out to be more magnetic, more genuine, more deeply connected to the people around her than the performance had ever been. Because people don't fall in love with performances. They fall in love with people. And you cannot be a person, a full, real, dimensional, alive person, while you are busy being a performance. The relationships that change. Let me be honest with you about something that nobody warns you about when you begin this work. Some relationships will not survive it. And I know that sounds frightening. But I need you to hear what I'm actually saying, because it is not the tragedy it initially appears to be. When you stop overcaring, when you stop performing, stop people-pleasing, stop making yourself smaller and more convenient and more palatable, some people in your life will be unsettled by it. Not because you have become worse. But because the dynamic they were comfortable with has shifted. They were comfortable with the version of you that was easy to manage. That didn't push back. That absorbed their moods without complaint. That could be relied upon to prioritize their comfort above your own truth. And when that version of you stops showing up, they will call it a problem with you. Let them. Because here is what simultaneously happens, and this is the part that makes everything worth it. The relationships that were built on something real will deepen. When you stop performing, the people who actually love you, not the performance, not the convenient version, not the you that never asks for anything and always says yes, those people will breathe a sigh of relief. Because they were never interested in the performance either. They wanted you. And they will find, in the more honest, less managed version of you, something they can finally hold on to completely. Real relationships require real people. And becoming a real person, fully, unapologetically, without the constant anxiety of managing perceptions, is the most generous thing you can offer the people who actually deserve your presence. The confidence that cannot be taken. There are two kinds of confidence. The first kind is built on external feedback. It rises when people approve and falls when they don't. It expands in rooms where you are celebrated and contracts in rooms where you are challenged. It is entirely dependent on the behavior of other people, which means it is never truly yours. It is borrowed. And borrowed things can always be reclaimed by the lender. This is the confidence most people are chasing. And it is the reason most people never feel truly, stably, unshakably confident, because what they are chasing is not confidence at all. It is approval. And approval is weather. It changes without warning and cannot be controlled. The second kind of confidence is built on internal alignment. It is the confidence that comes not from being validated by others, but from knowing, in your deepest self, that you are living in accordance with your actual values. That you are saying what you actually think. That you are making choices that reflect who you genuinely are rather than who you need to appear to be. This confidence does not fluctuate with the room. It does not rise and fall with someone else's mood. It does not collapse when someone criticizes you or disappear when you are misunderstood. Because it was never built on their opinion in the first place. It was built on something far more durable, your own relationship with yourself. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." This is the freedom that stopping the wrong kind of caring produces. Not the freedom from difficulty. Not the freedom from criticism or failure or loss. But the freedom of a self that is no longer held hostage by the shifting opinions of people who are themselves struggling to manage their own inner weather. That freedom, once genuinely felt, is the most addictive thing in the world. And the most stabilizing. Short story, the student who stopped raising his hand to be seen. There was a young man named Elias who was brilliant but invisible. Not because he had nothing to offer, but because everything he offered was calculated first for its reception. Before he spoke in class, he ran the words through an internal filter. Will this make me sound smart? Will it impress the professor? Will the other students find this interesting, or will they think it's obvious? By the time the filter finished running, the moment had passed. Someone else had said something. The conversation had moved. And Elias sat with his unspoken thought, quietly convincing himself that it probably wasn't worth saying anyway. He did this for 2 years. Then one afternoon, his professor said something during a lecture that Elias disagreed with, clearly, fundamentally, with a counterargument so clean and well-reasoned that it arrived in his mind fully formed. And for the first time, without running it through the filter, without checking for reception, without calculating whether it would land well, Elias raised his hand and said exactly what he thought. The room went quiet. The professor paused. And then smiled. That, the professor said, is the most interesting thing anyone has said in this class all semester. Elias hadn't changed. His intelligence hadn't changed. His insight hadn't changed. The only thing that changed was that he stopped caring whether his contribution would be received well, and just made it. And the contribution, freed from the weight of performance anxiety, landed exactly as powerfully as it was always capable of landing. This is what happens when you stop caring about the wrong things. You stop filtering your genius through other people's anticipated reactions. And your genius, unfiltered, direct, fully itself, turns out to be exactly what the room was waiting for. The daily discipline of not caring. I want to be honest with you about something before we close. This is not easy. I don't want to send you away with the impression that the shift we have been describing today is a decision you make once and then simply inhabit forever without effort. It is a discipline. A daily, intentional, sometimes uncomfortable discipline. Because the pull is real. The gravitational force of caring what people think, of measuring your worth by external feedback, of anchoring your peace to outcomes you cannot control, is one of the oldest and most deeply wired human impulses there is. We are social creatures. We were built for belonging. And the fear of rejection, the hunger for approval, the anxiety of being misunderstood, these are not character flaws. They are features of the human operating system. But they are features you can learn to govern. Not eliminate. Govern. Every morning, before the world arrives, you return to your center. You remind yourself what is in your control and what is not. You choose, deliberately and consciously, where your caring will be directed today. Not toward managing perceptions. Not toward engineering other people's opinions of you. Not toward outcomes you cannot determine. Toward your values. Your effort. Your character. Your choices. The quality of your presence in this one day that is actually available to you. That is the morning practice. That is why this episode is called Listen to This Every Morning. Not because you will forget the information. But because the application of it requires daily renewal. Daily return. Daily recommitment to the version of yourself that is not held hostage by the wrong things. Marcus Aurelius did it every morning for decades. Epictetus built his entire life around it. Seneca wrote about it, urgently, passionately, as if the stakes of getting it right were nothing less than the quality of every remaining day of his life. Because they were. And they are. What your life looks like on the other side. I want to paint you a picture. Not of a perfect life. Not of a life without difficulty or loss or the ordinary pain of being human. But of a life lived from the inside out instead of the outside in. A life where your first thought in the morning is not what do they think of me, but what do I think? What do I value? What am I building? What matters today? A life where criticism lands and is examined honestly, taken if it's useful, released if it's not, without the days of internal trial and self-dismantling that used to follow every piece of negative feedback. A life where your relationships are real, built on genuine connection rather than the careful management of impressions, and therefore deeper, more sustaining, more genuinely nourishing than anything the performance ever produced. A life where your confidence is yours. Fully, unborrowably, permanently yours, because it was built on the one foundation that nobody can take from you, your own alignment with your own truth. A life where you wake up, not lighter, exactly, because life will always have weight, but freer. Operating from a place of such settled, grounded, unshakable internal authority that the chaos of other people's opinions and uncontrollable outcomes becomes something you can observe without being consumed by. That life is available to you. It is not available to the version of you that keeps caring about the wrong things. But it is absolutely, completely, waiting patiently available to the version of you that decides, this morning, today, right now, to stop. Stop performing. Stop managing. Stop apologizing for your existence. Stop anchoring your peace to things that were never in your hands. And start, quietly, powerfully, one morning at a time, living from the inside out. If this conversation did something to you today, then I want you to stay close to this community. Because this is what the Stoic Path does. Every single episode, we come here and we have the conversations that most content is too comfortable, too cautious, too concerned with being like to have. We go to the real places. The honest places. The places where genuine transformation actually lives, not in the inspiration, but in the discomfort just beyond it. If you are not yet subscribed to the Stoic Path, do it right now. Not later. Now. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications. Because what we talked about today is just one thread in a much larger conversation, and that conversation continues every single week, right here, for the people who are serious about understanding themselves and building a life that is genuinely, authentically, powerfully their own. Share this episode with someone who needs it. You know who they are. The person who is exhausted by their own people-pleasing. The person who has been performing so long they've forgotten who the performer actually is. The person who is one honest morning practice away from the most significant shift of their life. Send it to them. No explanation needed. They'll know why you sent it.